Speaker is Douglas Kaufman of the Party for, okay, I'm going to get this wrong, Party for Socialism and Liberation, and you're going to talk to us about what Leninist Marxists meant by socialism and how we're going to get there?
Yeah.
Right? Okay, there you go.
Yeah, that's correct. So this is the more traditional left speaking now. And I just want to thank Occupy Venice Beach, everyone here, for having us out here to talk. And also commend you guys on some of the great actions that have been taking place, including the recent disruption of the oil companies and regulators. I think that was a really great thing. So round of applause for So the PSL, we're our Marxist-Leninist party, and since anti-communism is basically the unofficial official religion of the United States, promoted by the media and the US government, I'm going to talk to you quickly about what we mean by Marxism. What we mean by Marxism, the heart of Marxism is really just a scientific method for understanding social change, the contradictions of society, how they develop historically, and how to resolve them. In short, we would argue that every society has a base that's economic in nature, a certain organization of the economy and all of its players. What grows upon that base is a specific type of political system, legal system, culture, and ideas, which collectively function to maintain the economic base. So a good way to think about this is maybe soil, right? Some soil is a little bit more alkaline, some is more acidic, some is more neutral in pH, and there's a certain kind of vegetation that corresponds to all of those different types of soil. You're not going to find the same kind of vegetation growing naturally here in the western part of the United States as you would in the east or northwest. And the base that we have today, the soil we have, is capitalism. And what are some of the ideas of capitalism? Self-interest, greed, individualism, right? Some of the aspects of the legal system, if you're a landlord, if you're an owner of a company, you can get people evicted, you can get injunctions against workers, but if your slumlord is putting you in an unsafe living condition, or if you have unsafe working conditions, the police are never going to go to them and arrest them, right? These are just some examples of how we have a culture of consumerism. These are all the things that grow from that soil, that are rooted in that soil of capitalism. And if we know that capitalism is the base, then we can begin to look at how capitalism is organized to figure out where the problems lie in society. The biggest contradiction today with capitalist society is how all of our wealth is owned and produced. It's a combination of those factors. Every piece of personal property on you right now, if you take a look at it, your clothes, your shoes, your watch, your phone, the home that hopefully you're going to go home to tonight, with your car, on the bus, or with your bicycle, all of these things pass through the hands of hundreds, thousands of workers from all around the world. It was produced socially, but all the profit and the wealth from that production goes to a private individual, an investor, a banker, an owner of a corporation. And that's really the essential contradiction. It's a lot like, if you ever see a little child who's playing with their blocks, right? And they're just trying to jam that square into that circle, and they're just doing it over and over again. It's because those two ideas don't fit. We don't spend the money that we produce, the wealth that we produce, on social needs like housing, healthcare, and education. And so that's one of the essential features of capitalism, of this problem. And since the capitalists don't do the labor, right? The Walton family doesn't show up every day at hundreds of Walmarts across the country and actually check out all of their products. And since Steve Jobs never really built an iPhone except maybe a prototype, right? Those were built by the labor of hundreds of thousands of workers. Since that's the case, we can most accurately describe the capitalist system as a highly organized form of theft. And I wanted to talk to you shortly about what that theft looks like on a day-to-day basis, using my own personal experience. I work as an emergency medical technician, so I'm on an ambulance all day, 10, 12, 13, 14 hours a day, and I'm attending to patients. And on an average day, we run about 4 or 5 calls, and this ranges in cost. Each call costs about $800. Some are less, some range much higher depending on how far you go and what kind of medical services you provide. And that's the money that goes to the ambulance company, the company that I work for. So they're making between $3,200 and close to $5,000 a day just from our single ambulance at the company. And each day, since we get paid only $10 an hour, which is not a living wage, as all of you know in Los Angeles, since we only get paid $10 an hour, they're paying us $100 each. That's $200 in an ambulance. So we're talking about $3,000 above what it costs for us to actually work that day. But of course, the owners of the corporation that I work for, Rural Metro, and the company that I work for, they're not driving the ambulance, right? They're not taking care of the patients. And without us, none of that wealth would be produced. And yet all of it, almost all of it, goes to them. And we're given an amount that we can barely subsist on. That's the essential aspect of theft that you can find in any workplace in a capitalist society. And the vast majority of us, go to work. We get a paycheck to pay for our education, our healthcare, our homes, food, clothes, and other commodities that these same capitalists are selling to us, exploiting other workers to get. And capitalism as a system has always been based on exploitation. It's always been based on racism. The capitalists grew rich in the United States from the unpaid labor of millions of enslaved Africans, from the genocidal conquest of natives, and from the theft of Mexican land. And so capitalism, like all social systems that came before it, has developed a series of irreconcilable and unsolvable contradictions for society, for huge parts of the planet's population, and of course for the ability of the planet's environment to be sustained in such a way that allows humans to continue to exist. We're not arrogant enough to think that the world's going to end, right? We're just going to go extinct. Because production, hopefully not, because production in capitalism is set into motion exclusively to generate profits for the capitalists, a relatively small clique of investors and bankers, like I said, they make decisions every day that make life increasingly impossible for the working class of the United States and globally. All rights under capitalism essentially belong to those owners and banks. The property is privately owned. The capitalists have the right to employ labor to make profits, but the workers under capitalism don't have the right to a decent paying job or a job at all or an income. Under capitalism, healthcare is a source for profit, like everything else. They provide healthcare to make a profit, not to actually heal the sick. That's why we can't go to a doctor. That's why we have to go through insurance companies in order to get healthcare. Capitalism turns every single activity into a commodity for sale so the capitalists can become richer. Every single object of human production is a commodity. When the banks tanked the economy in 2007, tens of thousands of workers lost jobs, and the capitalist politicians bailed out the banks. They gave the banks $1 trillion in handouts, loans, and loan guarantees. And then they turned around and said to the workers that if you're struggling with your mortgage, that if you can't pay your monthly mortgage, that the same banks who destroyed the economy now get to foreclose on your home and take that away from you. More than 9 million families in America have faced foreclosure since 2007. Not because they've done anything wrong, but because housing, like healthcare, education, and everything else in capitalist society is legally a commodity, and the right to profit is considered the supreme right, above the right to a home. The capitalists decided that a big section of the US working class is no longer necessary because they can make super profits by paying workers abroad in Mexico, India, even in other parts of the United States. They move into places like Mississippi, parts of the South. And this has left 30 to 40 million people underemployed or unemployed in some of the traditional industrial urban centers. Poverty is rapidly on the rise at the same time that corporate profits rise. That's what's wrong with capitalism. Capitalism is in fact in its highest stage, what we would call imperialism, where the control of this handful of capitalists, or a handful of them in each advanced country, mostly represented by the US, Western Europe, and Japan, is spread across the world through free trade agreements, the export of factories, and control of other countries' natural resources. This system is under constant pressure from the subjugated peoples attempting to liberate themselves, and also from the rivalries of other imperialists. This is why the US has been perpetually at war for as long as any of us can remember. Because it is profitable to force other countries to trade on your terms. It's profitable to allow the exploitation of their resources and profitable to exploit their workers. And it's even profitable to sell the bullets and bombs necessary to accomplish these goals. It's sickening, but 1 million dead Iraqis, Palestinians, Syrians, and Libyans is actually worth billions of dollars to banks, oil companies, infrastructure, and defense contractors. You can think of capitalist society as a pyramid. The base is very wide, and in it are all of us, you and me, as well as all of the working people in society. We do all of the work in society, and yet the wealth that we produce is used to enrich the very top 1%. All rights belong to them. What we want to do as socialists, as Marxist-Leninists, is to turn that pyramid upside down. We want to give the rights to the majority, to the working class. And what socialism means for us is that first, we nationalize the banks and corporations, all of them. Instead of going to the capitalists, all of their profits would then be used by society to make sure every human being has health care, a decent paying job, housing, education, childcare, and ensuring that the life of this planet is sustainable. That's where the money comes from. It's pretty simple. From the capitalists. We take it from them and use it for society's needs. We take it from them because the massive wealth that they are hoarding right now is ill-begotten. We know that when a thief is caught, typically you want your property back. And since we now understand what capitalism is about, that it's organized theft, we understand that we've caught the thief. Now what we have to do is regain the property that belongs to all of us. So many of you are probably wondering, how do we rob back our riches? From a Marxist-Leninist perspective, we do this by, again, using a scientific approach to examine our enemy, the capitalists, their relative strength and weaknesses, to determine the best methods. We can see that our society is run by a dictatorship of the rich. They finance the political system. They give orders to the state and political wing of the government. They control the mass media. They have a highly organized and centralized apparatus for spying on, disrupting, and defeating any threat to their rule, and a history of doing exactly that, both domestically and globally. And I know that everyone here who participated in the Occupy movement knows all about that. But our advantage is that they are outnumbered. As you all know, it's 99 to 1. And unlike them, we have the power to stop society, because we are the ones who make society run. As Marxist-Leninists, we feel that there is a need to build a Marxist party. The purpose of a party is to organize the working class, the base of that pyramid that we talked about, into a highly organized and centralized fighting force that can match and eventually defeat the organized and centralized force that defends capitalist rule. The role of such party under capitalism is to participate in all the struggles of working people for better wages, working conditions, against racism, police terrorism, environmental destruction, for women's and LGBTQ equality, for the rights of the undocumented, and against imperialist war on other nations. As we participate in these struggles to improve the lives of working people, We point to capitalism as the root cause of these ills and socialism as the ultimate solution in the hope of recruiting more people to the organization and overall strategy in general of defeating capitalism itself permanently. Once the capitalists are defeated by a massive rebellion of the working class, who over time and through struggle become conscious of their exploitation, the role of the party changes to one of consolidating that victory and to begin to organize society along new lines that put people before profit. The role of the party becomes the implementation of a socialist program, using the wealth produced by society and expropriated by all of us to meet society's needs and to defend the new system from attack. Over time, upon a new economic base of socialism, a new soil that we put on the ground, the people are engaged in a process of developing a new political system, legal system, culture, and ideas that over generations will permanently eliminate all of the outdated ideas of capitalism. And this program, included in this program, number one is a right for every human being to have a decent paying job, or if they can't work, a living income. Every human being has a right to absolutely free health care, that when you are sick, you go to a doctor and you don't get a bill. It means education is free, through and including college. Even in Cuba, a small, poor island nation under the gun of US imperialism and decades-long blockade, education is free. And that was true in all socialist countries, like the Soviet Union. Students were actually paid to go to school, instead of having crippling student debt when they leave. It includes the right to housing, that all adults have the right to a place to live. Housing would be built and constructed so people could live in it, not so other people could make a profit. And this would be an easy one for us to resolve because we know there are millions of empty homes still from this glut of home production that caused the recent crisis. It means childcare would be a social obligation and a right to all mothers and fathers. It shouldn't be the work of only women, and it shouldn't be the work of only families. Society should make free, quality childcare a priority. So when we talk about socialism, we're talking about taking the main levers of society away from the capitalists and using those products and those resources, or what might be called profits, to meet society's needs. Another existential contradiction that comes from unplanned capitalist development, where profit for the corporations is the sole and exclusive motive, is the unsustainable use of fossil fuels and the exorbitant dependency on carbon that has led to such a profound climate change that the very existence of the planet as we know it is imperiled. In fact, socialism not only eliminates private property, but produces, according to a rational plan, what human beings actually need to live in happiness and what the environment needs in order to sustain life. In short, a socialist planned economy allows for society to make choices about what to produce, how much to produce, and how to distribute what is produced so that human need is met and the environment is protected. For us in California, this chaotic social suicide is more real than ever. With only a year left of surface water and groundwater rapidly being depleted by unregulated agribusiness's veritable water rush to maintain a $25 billion export revenue, alongside billions of gallons of water being used for the profits of oil, gas, and ironically beverage production. We must organize, not in the next few months, not even tomorrow, but immediately, to face this threat. Our demand should be to ban fracking and seize all of the wealth from these oil companies, bottling operations, and the profits from agricultural exports to take immediate steps to radically transform our irrigation, reorganize our agricultural production, and develop new technology to acquire water. These are immediate steps to avert a crisis, but only a planned socialist economy can move science and technology forward to protect the environment permanently. At one time, society was ruled by feudal lords or slave owners. Today we have a new ruling class, popularly known as the 1%, or more accurately, the 1% of the 1%. We want a new ruling class in society, which would be all of the working people in society. Our program, the program of socialists, is to organize so that human beings come first and put workers in position of power, Socialism is an outgrowth of capitalism, the next step in human history, and those that will bring socialism come from within capitalist society, the very working class who created all of the wealth. The US and global working class is highly educated. It does not need the capitalists to make society run. If the capitalists ceased to exist, no one would notice. If Jamie Dimon, T. Boone Pickens, if the Waltons didn't exist tomorrow, no one would know. We wouldn't know because society would continue to function. And that's essentially what our program is. We want a society that puts people's needs first. As Marxist-Leninists, that's our view and that's our road to get there. So thank you for listening, and let's continue to organize for alternatives to capitalism because that's essential to us surviving. Thank you. For understanding social change, the contradictions of society, how they develop historically, and how to resolve them. In short, we would argue that every society has a base that's economic in nature, a certain organization of the economy and all of its players. What grows upon that base is a specific type of political system, legal system, culture, and ideas, which collectively function to maintain the economic base. So a good way to think about this is maybe soil, right? Some soil is a little bit more alkaline, some is more acidic, some is more neutral in pH, and there's a certain kind of vegetation that corresponds to all of those different types of soil. You're not going to find the same kind of vegetation growing naturally here in the western part of the United States. Yeah, that's correct. So this is the more traditional left speaking now. And I just want to thank Occupy Venice Beach, everyone here, for having us out here to talk, and also commend you guys on some of the great actions that have been taking place, including the recent disruption of the oil companies and regulators. I think that was a really great thing. So round of applause for So the PSL, we're our Marxist-Leninist party, and since anti-communism is basically the unofficial official religion of the United States, promoted by the media and the US government, I'm going to talk to you quickly about what we mean by Marxism. What we mean by Marxism, the heart of Marxism is really just a scientific method, fits as you would in the East or Northwest. And the base that we have today, the soil we have, is capitalism. And what are some of the ideas of capitalism? Self-interest, greed, individualism, right? Some of the aspects of the legal system. If you're a landlord, if you're an owner of a company, you can get people evicted, you can get injunctions against workers. But if your slumlord is putting you in an unsafe living condition, or if you have unsafe working conditions, the police are never going to go to them and arrest them, right? These are just some examples of how we have a culture of consumerism. These are all the things that grow from that soil, that are rooted in that soil of capitalism. And if we know that capitalism is the base, then we can begin to look at how capitalism
So our next speaker is Douglas Kaufman of the Party for, I'm going to get this wrong, Party for Socialism and Liberation. And you're going to talk to us about what Leninist Marxists meant by socialism and how we're going to get there?
Yeah.
Right? Okay, there you go.
Capitalism is organized to figure out where the problems lie in society. The biggest contradiction today with capitalist society is how all of our wealth is owned and produced. It's a combination of those factors. Every piece of personal property on you right now, if you take a look at it, your clothes, your shoes, your watch, your phone, the home that hopefully you're going to go home to tonight, with your car, on the bus, or with your bicycle, all of these things pass through the hands of hundreds, thousands of workers from all around the world. It was produced socially, but all the profit and the wealth from that production goes to a private individual, an investor, a banker, an owner of a corporation. And that's really the essential contradiction. It's a lot